My country people, saluto. This one na Dr. J again. So this one on part three of this political education series, where I don't describe them, I define them as understanding the international system. For this particular, if you never listen to part one and part two, I want just encourage you to make una find them, go listen to them, understand which the arguments that I try to make for those other part one and part two, so that make una fit get a better context of which you'll be about to talk about in this particular third audio. I feel say after this third audio or video, I will probably make a fourth video. So once you don't listen to this series right up to the fourth, I beg not jump to any conclusions, because for certain audios them, for certain sections them, I don't make very strong cases them that make our case to look like hopeless. But that's not my intention. I want to be able to build a case as solid and as strongly put as I have thus far, to be able to ultimately bring us to a space where we can be able to see why it is important to focus on internal mobilization. Why we need to shift our resources for being able to focus on changing the dynamics on the ground, not just from a self-defense guerrilla strategy perspective, but also pretty much from a stakeholder engagement, political education, and political mobilization strategy. The message I struggle to put them across, I say we get a very realistic expectation about the international community. There's no international community no there for outside the way get a standby army way or fly down into Tico or fly down into Bamenda or Bafut, release soldiers them, engage the Republic Army, push them back beyond the Mongo, and then bring we two onto the same table, say make we negotiate independence. I feel say over the time as we don't talk with our people them, for some reason we seem to don't give people the impression saying that it happen. That one is a very distant dream. It not going to happen. International system doesn't function that way. For this particular audio, I want to talk about the international system from a non-African perspective. In the last audio, I make a very strong case for, say, in the post-Cold War era, international system they function in such a way for international community, particularly from a multilateral perspective, the community of nations, looking in this case at the United Nations Security Council, for them to intervene, they typically need the approval or the endorsement of the African Union. In the last audio, if you never listen about the last video, you never yet watch the part two, go back, go understand the brief description I give about the way the African Union is set up and the likelihood and the possibility, say they will be able to give that endorsement where it will be necessary for there to be intervention. For this particular audio, I want to be able to bring out just 2 points. Number one, for give a brief description about the international system, and number two, for be able to give a brief explanation about the circumstances, the way they intervene. And broadly speaking, the international system they typically intervene in 2 scenarios. Number one, in cases of gross violation of human rights. Number two, when specific economic interests can be threatened. The gross violation of human rights, now the Father Christmas explanation of intervention. But all of we need to realize, say, many circumstances and situations of gross violation of human rights have occurred in the past, are occurring at the moment, that have not warranted the intervention of the international system. It be necessary to remind ourselves of this one for people to build realistic expectations. Because for some reason, and from my first audio, I try to paint a picture for which will happen in the case of the Rwandan genocide, for being able to compare and place what we did today as the people, to understand the cost in human life, where it be warrant an international outcry, not even an international intervention, an international outcry, because at the end of the day, the story, the outcome of that Rwandan genocide was significantly influenced by the fact that Kagame had troops on the ground with support from important quarters as part of the dynamics of the Great Lake region. That's what made the difference. It wasn't a resolution of the United Nations Security Council that dispatched troops. The only instances in which we have had United Nations Security Council's resolutions that have warranted military-style interventions have only been in circumstances where very heavy economic interests were threatened. In Libya, in Iraq, Iran, Kuwait, the Gulf War. The international system has not even been unanimous about intervention in the Syrian case, where there was a clear, or there is a clear clash between the members of the Security Council and their views of what needs to happen in Syria. It has not been able to go through the United Nations Security Council. But the fact that the international monetary system is structured in such a way that there are 15 members of the UN Security Council, 5 permanent members and 10 non-permanent members that are voted for 2 years. The 5 permanent members are China, France, Russia, the UK, and the USA. As far as our Southern Cameroonian and Amazonian conflict is concerned, 4 out of the 5 permanent members of the United Nations Security Council have proven to be hostile to our cause. France, for obvious reasons, the UK, for obvious reasons, partly because they are part of the reason why we are in this mess, and secondly, because they have very important business interests and deals with the Republic of Cameroon. From a discounting of option perspective, we do not have much to offer. China, for obvious reasons, China has, first of all, and our people need to realize this, China, in its foreign policy orientation on the African continent, they have an official stance not to meddle in the internal affairs of the states with which they do business. They approach Africa from a purely mercantilist perspective. For a very long time, Africa, we have celebrated the fact that they come here, they give us loans, they build infrastructure for us, and they go. They don't look into our politics. It's an official position. So they are only interested in the Amazonian conflict. It cannot be to upset the political status quo. It would only be to protect their business interests. So they will veto anything that comes out on behalf of Amazonia on the Security Council if it attacks their business interests. And we all know at the moment that La République du Cameroun is one of the highest African countries indebted to China. So when they see La République du Cameroun in a space of unrest, they have 2 concerns. There needs to be stability in that country so that they can pay us back our money. That's Chinese primary interest. And their secondary interest is, how do we within this thing take advantage of our business opportunities? That's China. So when we work and work and work and work and work and work, and even if we push this thing to get it on the agenda of the UN Security Council, there are at least 4 out of the 5 that would veto it. We need to convince China, convince Russia, convince the UK, convince France to turn their backs against the Republic of Cameroon to support us. I would leave you to go and do the maths about the probability of such an outcome. And I say this again for us to be able to understand that I am not trying to paint a picture of doom and gloom. My objective is singular. 1, let us build realistic expectations about the international community and what they can do. Straight up. Nobody should sit anywhere around Southern Cameroons and have and hold the dream that a plane is going to land in Douala or is going to land in Bafut or in Chico. Troops are going to come down and engage La République du Cameroon soldiers in warfare. It's not going to happen. So we should take that option off our mind. Our responsibility in our engagement with the international community is to put our issue on the agenda. Our responsibility is to be able to highlight the humanitarian issues. That is why, and as far as the humanitarian consequences of our conflict is concerned, it is not through nation states, because quite frankly, nation states do not have moral barometers by which they judge the intervention or the treatment of countries against their own citizens. They don't care. Let me put you that way blatantly. They have lots of domestic challenges. Nobody takes upon himself the moral high ground to be able to go and say that you're massacring your people, therefore we're going to intervene over to the government. That is not covered in international law. It's not going to happen. The only people who can hold their governments to account would be the civil society and the non-state actors in those countries. Because especially for societies that are sane societies that are governed along the lines of democratic principles, Their governments have certain constitutional responsibilities towards the taxpayers and the electorate. That is why engagement with people like what do you call them? Human Rights Watch, the reports that are produced by Oxford University, engagements that we hold with the non-state actors within those constituencies is done with the intention of putting pressure on their own host governments to hold on to certain ideals and standards that these governments have subscribed to talk about the issue, to shine the spotlight on the management of the Republic of Cameroon. It is a life-preserving endeavor. It is very important. It is because of that that these people are has not massacred us today, because there can be an outcry that an NGO will take and run with it and publish in the international media, and the rest of the world is going to bring pressure to bear on the Republic of Cameroon. The consequence or the implication of that level of advocacy is just for the preservation of our own lives, so that these people do not finish us. But that level of advocacy is never going to translate to pushing any of these countries that are hitting hard on the Republic of Cameroon to take up guns and confront the state of Cameroon. Let us be realistic in our expectations. That is not going to happen. So as we continue to engage, now, when I say that's not going to happen, what is the alternative I'm proposing? Those partners are only going to come to the table to be able to facilitate and mediate on the basis of the situation that we would have created on the ground. The extent of the engagement, the quality of the engagement, the likelihood of potential outcomes, which is another added reason why we are supposed to be unanimous as Southern Cameroonians about what we want and how we want it. A lot of people will be very surprised to realize that for the end of apartheid in South Africa, even though these respective powers fought to support the African National Congress and the Liberation Movement against apartheid, I spoke to one of the struggle stewards, Reverend Frank Chikane, was very instrumental. He was the chief of staff of the Thabo Mbeki government. And he told me that when they got to the point where they were going for a negotiation, they intentionally did not secure the services of a negotiator of the international community. They kept them out of the room. They were able to train their own people who became negotiators to sit across the table with the apartheid regime and strike a deal for the establishment of a new South Africa. A lot of people may not like the sound of this. At the end of the day, the resolution of this conflict and its potential outcome would be a negotiations between Southern Cameroonians and La République du Cameroon. This is what's going to end this conflict. Now, it gets each and everyone else to understand that your ability to be able to negotiate with them is definitely going to then be a function of how much you have brought them to a place where you compel them to accept the outcomes that you want, with the associated costs and the ability to be able to enforce your demands. But I will make a separate series on that, on why I think that we need to create realistic expectations as far as our engagement or the involvement in the international community is concerned. Because none of these people would be able to come and enforce a view or a position on the negotiation table stronger than that which represents La République Cameroon interest or Southern Cameroon interest. The only context and reason with which they intervene is when their own interests are affected. So, as far as expecting an outcome from the United Nations Security Council to intervene in our conflict, it's a realistic expectation that we need to be measured about it. Of the 5 permanent members of the Security Council at the moment, it's only America that has sort of taken a tough stand against the regime in Yaoundé. I was listening to Ambassador Cohen yesterday, and he was able to tell us that within the State Department, the Cameroon government considers the American government as being hostile to the Cameroon government. Now, that is English to tell you that the business interest that America has in La République du Cameroon are under threat. So the business people who fund and sponsor American politicians to get to power, whose interests are being threatened by the American position, could very well change. There's a Chad-Cameroon pipeline. There are lots of discoveries of minerals across the national territory, both in the Republic of Cameroon and in our sector, in our territory. There are lots of practical business considerations that could change the political disposition of the American State Department overnight. This is an election year. We may wake up with someone who is not a Trump in the White House. Let us not forget that it is not only the Republic of Cameroon that is lobbying the American government, the fifth person on the Security Council, as far as we are concerned, but it is the other partners. America and the UK are strong allies all the way coming from the Second World War. We should be concerned that as far as the questions and issue of Southern Cameroon and Bosnia is concerned, they're speaking from two different perspectives. But we should also bear in mind that America is not going to break its relationship with the UK because of us. We should also realize and not be deceived with the notion that as far as Ambazonia and the Southern Cameroon question is concerned, the UK has a higher and a greater historical stake than the US does. It means that when push comes to shove and Britain and America lock themselves behind the boardroom, the natural outcome of such an intense engagement would be that America should toe the line of the British position. That's how they operate. France, same kind of thing. They are not only a member of the UN Security Council, but within the 2019-2020 election context of the 20 other non-permanent members of the Security Council, you have Belgium, Cote d'Ivoire, Equatorial Guinea, Germany, and South Africa. France has an influence over all of these countries. Belgium, Germany, because of their European Union connections, Cote d'Ivoire, obviously, Equatorial Guinea, obviously, and to a very significant extent, France has a very strong relationship with South Africa. France has a very strong relationship with Nigeria. South Africa and Nigeria are the only other two Anglo-Saxon African powers that could want to speak on our behalf. But both South Africa and Nigeria have strong relationships with the UK. Both South Africa and Nigeria have strong relationships with France. Both South Africa and Nigeria have an interest in the protection of South African-Nigerian relationship. They have a strong relationship with each other, both South Africa and Nigeria. South Africa, for all of our engagements on the South African up to this point, we have constantly been reminded about the fact that South Africa is not prepared to contradict Nigeria on the African continent on any question. That's the first thing. From South African perspective and from the function of the African Union system, the regional economic community takes preeminence and takes preeminence over bilateral initiatives. So South Africa is not going to jump over ECOWAS to intervene in Amazonia. That is why we need to have a conversation within ECOWAS. Somebody that can have a voice that will be an alternative ECOWAS voice to contradict Nigeria's voice, for us to hope to have even a divided ECOWAS position. We need a country that is willing to take on Nigeria within ECOWAS. And you must ask yourself the question, what is in it for them? We need to get this thing to a space where South Africa is willing to consider to stand up for us in the UN Security Council. It could possibly be on the basis of a human rights abuses, but we know that South Africa has huge business interest in Cameroon. Tiger Brands owns what used to be called Shokokam. South Africa has a move into Africa business expansion policy. At the end of the day, the function of the international community is a game of interest. Nobody jumps and goes and gets involved in the war because they like the merit of our arguments, because they like the legality of our explanations. At the end of the day, it will be irresponsible on the South African government's part to be able to antagonize Cameroon at the expense of the millions and millions flowing from La République du Cameroon to the South African treasury. to help them with their own challenges. My country people, that is the realism about the international community we are talking about. Now, how does anybody understand the complexity of this system, understand how much the odds are stacked against us, and still hope for an Amazonian victory? It is because we hope against all hope on the merit of the justice of our cause. It's because our backs is against the wall, against the wall. It's because it's a last option for us. It's because we have so experienced in the last 50, 60 years, and we've come to the conclusion that, notwithstanding the fact that the odds are hugely stacked against us, we need to do something about this. We need to fight back. But we cannot then afford for ourselves the foolishness of creating expectations that cannot be realized. We can therefore not afford for ourselves the foolishness of structuring interventions that of rolling out the way we organize ourselves and engage with each other in the international community that builds expectations about what we think they can do that they cannot do. Every time you stand in front of an international diplomat and you make the Amazonian case, and they look at you and see that you do not realize what you are asking them to do in terms of the implications of your request for their own national interest, they take you like a joke. They say you don't know what you're doing. And that's the story of a number of our people who parade the streets of institutions out there day in, day night, making presentations about our cause. Having the expectation that we are all of a sudden going to make a fine sounding case, and then a country is going to commit resources to go to engage in war with another nation state on the basis of the fact that we have spoken to them or we have organized a few strikes in front of their embassies or in front of their offices. Let us be able to measure those expectations so that the people we are engaging with can take us seriously, so that we can stand a chance of producing an outcome on the ground that is meaningful. We must understand the function of the international community, the international system, and then position ourselves to know how to organize ourselves. We would never be able to go above the level of our own organization. We would never be able to go above the level of our own internal mobilization. We will never be able to go above the level of our own engagement on the ground. How we study like the Republic of Cameroon, understand the weaknesses of the system, and then position ourselves to get results out of that system. This is what's going to make a difference. And this is the only kind of process the international community is going to accompany. When they can see that the dynamics on the ground has changed to the extent that their intervention would directly be reconciled with their own strategic interests. Because the relationship between nations, it's a relationship built on interest and on interest alone. Nothing more, nothing less. As far as our understanding of international communities understand, we must digest that completely. Whenever we want to think about approaching anybody to intervene in our case, we should write interest in bold capital letters and put it in front of our presentation, and then build whatever case we want to make from a perspective of interest, where you can make a business case about what interests are affected and how they should intervene and why they should intervene and what is in it for them. Then you have started talking to the international community. Before then, all we are doing is just you fill in the blank. So I'm going to come and make a last part of this. And in that last part, my intention will be able to summarize all of this and be able to suggest a way forward as far as our mobilization is concerned.